Ladies and gentlemen, we are live right now with a good friend of mine, David Dubyne, and one of the most prolific independent journalists when it comes to mini Ice Age conversations. One of his channel Adapt 30, talks about the current shifts and our sun moving forward and how that affects civilizations. He's one of the top experts in civilizations around the world and how they're affected by weather. And recently, he's been taking the deep dive into the Great Reset and the work of, let's say, Charles Schwab and what's happening worldwide with supply chain disruptions, food supply failures. Welcome to the show, David.
Thanks. That's quite some introduction. You being a world expert as well, and a geologist that sees the cycles locked into the rocks.
Well, I'm researching in academia and lots of the papers, and I have the paleoclimatological background. But you've delved into the literature, and your specialty is one that's dear to my heart, and that's the type of work you've been doing for over 6 years over at Adapt 2030, and also your new podcast, which is Mini Ice Age Conversations. And there we have it right there to the right. You want to talk a little bit about what you discuss on Mini Ice Age Conversations for those that don't know?
Yeah, the same things Diamond and I are going to talk about. I mean, whether it's a long-term cycle that can be mapped in the rocks, or whether it's a short-term cycle that's civilization collapse or societal collapse, population migration, economic reset, and government restructuring. I mean, these cycles are cycles, whether it be the let's say the La Nina or the El Nino patterns, those are a mappable cycle. The 11-year solar cycle is a mappable cycle. Well, so are, how do you say, signs in the rocks that we're going through cycles. So, you know, when you start to talk about how does it bring it to the current economic and how are people going to react, it doesn't matter because it's all experienced through civilization and human history here. Long-term or short-term, it's all cycles. And, you know, once you start to read the cycle and you can get a timeline gauged on where it onsets and where it intensifies, then you can see how governments would react and spin and try to control the narrative or ride on top of the natural cycle, like I believe is happening now. And then here we are, we sit today, you look at the news, it's exactly what it would need to be to distract away from natural food shortages caused by solar activity, moving jet streams, and cloud cells. Well, I guess that's the way we'll start the thing tonight.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, you and I, for over 5 years, have been warning about food shortages that were coming in 3 to 5 years. And we were warning about migrations coming in 3 to 5 years. And now here we are. The climate hasn't shifted significantly, but it has. We've reached back down to baseline of the last 30 years of temperature in the last monthly update coming from the UAH global satellite. But geopolitically, the world is a different place. And we've seen just in the last few years, mass migration of people. And now with this war in the Ukraine, we have tens of millions of people, mass migrations again. And this is just ramping up. What are your thoughts on the ramping up of the migrations? And then we'll get to the food shortages.
They all overlap. See, the extremes on the cold or the heat where we're coming into, it's starting to be felt or seen now. And it seems like the winds are really out of kilter, and it seems everything's a little bit windier, which would be expected if your atmosphere is going to go out of sync during this same cycle. But again, you had to mask that. So think about it, you got two choices here. You're a set of world body governments back in, say, 1990, and you have two choices. You can tell the masses what's coming in the next solar cycles that will usher in this ability for us not to be able to grow enough food on the planet because the planting and the harvesting season will be out of the normal range, and we might get some losses and gargantuan losses because of early freezes or late freezes all coming in the springtime. Or you could come clean and say, hey, we're going to have a huge problem coming up in the 2020s, and we need to get our communities ready. And you need to get way more self-sufficient and get off the decentralization here and come back into local communities like our grandparents or pioneering lifestyle communities did. But nope, they took us right down into the centralization boulevard, if you will, and everything got centralized. And there's so much dependence on the central systems for delivery of everything. That's going to get yanked out because it just doesn't seem to work during these grand solar minimum cycles. And you need to mask it at the same time because you could never be blamed for not warning the people on a cycle that was known, that was inbound onset at this time. So distraction away, here we go.
Yeah, and it's becoming ever so clear that this is actually part of the plan, depopulation, and in a big way. But it's like I've been saying on my channel for years. It's more than half a decade. The changes that we discuss, like everyone's expecting for like the aha moment, the big boom, the end of it all. But what happens is it slowly changes. Change is hard to measure through, as you are experiencing change, you can't really experience it. It's only down the line, 8, 10 months, a year later, where you're like, oh my goodness, things have changed. And we're sitting right there. The amount of change in the last 2 years has been so massive. There are actually probably half the population thinks that at some point we may go back to the way things were. And that's not how this works. Do you want to touch on that a little bit?
Well, yeah, the progress is always forward. And the people over at the WF are talking about how we've entered the new world, and we're definitely not going back to the old world. So when you got some of the constructors or, financiers and leaders in thought and business moving society in a certain direction, the same leaders pushing all those buttons are saying, we're not going back.
Yeah.
So we're definitely heading forward here. Something new, and, sustainability goals, et cetera, would have a nice blueprint of where they want to go from now until there.
Yeah. And I think that enough of the public is waking up to the fact that none of this is in their best interest. Do you know what I'm saying? Gas going to $7, $8 a gallon is not in their best interest. Food doubling is not in the majority of people's best interest. So it falls on our shoulders, independent journalists like you and I, to be, and this is what we've been doing for 6 years, for goodness sakes. We've been telling people to become sustainable, to be less reliant on these criminal systems that are now collapsing before our very lives. And we need to warn the public. At the same time, we were just discussing this before we hit the record button. They are doing their very best to silence us.
Well, that's interesting. You and I going through the same kind of censorship things here. Warned off, don't talk about that too much. You're going too heavy into the timelines. You're going to spook people. Stop what you're doing. And then Biden blows it out that, hey, we're going into global food shortages right now. I think the cat was out of the bag several months early on this one. Timelines were at the end of May. People would have understood there wasn't enough fertilizer and herbicide to get the yields that we were used to. They're already looking at about 18% decline this year globally, just because there was a fertilizer and herbicide shortage. But now we got the Ukraine thing and the whole Black Sea lockup. But Biden let it slip out that the food shortages were coming. So a few people I'd say about 60% would have understood what the herbicide and fertilizer shortages would have meant come harvest season. But when Biden came out and said there's going to be food shortages, 100% of people got the message at the same time. Like everybody.
Yeah, but we make so much more food than we need, and it's not really going to be a food shortage, in my opinion. This is the way they're framing it. There's going to be food.
It's control of the food system.
It's going to be a $13 loaf of bread. And so for like $56, you can make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And that's not going to fly for the American public. That's not going to keep them healthy. That is not going to keep them happy either. So there will be food. It will just be rationed or so expensive that you're completely depleted. And then once you don't have any money, then there's the real food shortage. You can't buy food, so you starve. And now,
or you get on the digital system and you take the universal basic income and get on their digital ration card, and then do whatever you're told, because you'll lose your food access if you don't.
Right. And Lee and I were just talking about this. Now, I want to make this very clear to the people listening.
Wait, can I say one thing, Diamond? Can I say one thing? The food shortage is, you're right, it's a food shortage. But for me, it's grabbing total dominance over the food supply of the globe. It is a full-on takeover of the global food supply while you're distracted with the food shortage, because they can ram through any legislation, laws, mandates, whatever they want that can come anew, and nobody will even be bothered to look because they're starving and they're hungry and they're scared. So it's a total takeover. As much as any industry you can think across the planet in the last, say, 100 years, that was taken over and dominated completely by globalists.
Yeah. And what
that's about to happen with the food supply in the globe here.
Right. And when they digitize the money here in the US, what they found in researching in the last few years is that there is no way that the U.S. digital currency can be on the blockchain because they can't control it. So it's not going to be a blockchain digital currency. It is going to be a central bank controlled digital currency from the World Monetary Fund or something like that, that every single penny that's transacted, every single penny, right now, probably less than 30% of all money is known what the transactions are. Because it's like where I live, it's all cash. Like no one writes down what you just threw $30 on. And so, but once they shift, every single penny is going to be known. There will be no way to not pay your income tax. There will be, everything will be, and that is the beginning of the end, in my opinion.
Distributed ledger settlement, I think, is where they're going to go. They've been talking with Ripple for so long. And, you know, that whole thing when XRP got stuck off to the sidelines and nobody could trade it and every exchange dropped it. Again, look at the narrative, just like COVID. Every nation followed lockstep. They all had the exact same protocols across the entire globe, and that was it. Bam. Now we're seeing the exact same thing with food. Now they're all talking about food shortages, food, lockstep across the entire globe. You know, they're going to ration it. But then with XRP, the same thing. And all across the entire globe, the same parroted narratives in media. Don't touch it. It's the security. Don't touch it. Totally delisted everywhere. But suddenly, IMF and Bank for International Settlements talking about using it as a settlement instrument, and to piggyback on that for exactly what you're talking about here, central bank digital currencies and the new digital dollar. Like it can literally run every single currency of every country on the planet. And I think that's why it was taken offline, so it couldn't be traded, but now it's held. So if you own some, you just won the lottery by having some before it got delisted. So it'll be a distributed ledger settlement. But yeah, you know, there's always going to be people outside the system, though. There's always going to be trading, bartering, black market, gold, silver, anything. I need a tool. You need some fruit. I need some seeds. You need a shoelace, whatever. I make shoelaces. I got the wax here. We got bees. I make my own fabric because we save the cattails down at the pond there, and we, you know, whatever. You know, there's always, yeah, well, it's cattail season coming in. So I'm, you know, down here looking at the pond, waiting for them to come up with the grass, figure if I want to get the shoots or if I want to wait for them to go to the small heads or harvest the pollen this year or what. I don't know. This cattail season coming up. So we got 2 ponds real close to us. That's a food source.
Tax, you and I are doing the same thing. What is
Diamond, you're fuzzing out on me.
Better now?
Yeah, better.
Okay. What are you prepping now the most as we move into this shift? What are you doing?
Knowledge. Because if somebody has a sliver of a skill and then we have either a book or, I know downloadable stuff might not be the best unless you have your own complete power system to be able to get it on your device, but to get as much knowledge as you can now and build those skills and find other people who have similar skills at this time while we can. I really think we don't have much time left, Diamond, like seriously, just months, plural. And it's going to start to implode, and you'll see a lot of lockoffs and countries not exporting food. And then there'll be that whole monetary downturn because people can't trade or buy. There's no GDP for a country anymore. It's meant to collapse. You know what I mean? It's just meant to switch systems and take all the wealth with it from one old system into the new system.
The beautiful thing is the sun is ramping up and it's shooting lots of coronal mass ejections directly towards Earth. This is a little change from the last ramp up in the last solar cycle. And the Earth facing quiet seems to be dialing down a little bit. The last
Faraday cage ready. Did you get it? Who's gotten the Faraday cage ready?
Raise your hand. All right. So what I'm saying is my prediction is that by summer of 2023, which is just about 16 months away, I think that we're going to start to see some grid failures and that their plans will crumble. And I'm counting on this. I'm counting on all of the globalist clutches unraveling from one pop from the sun. And if it's not next year, it will be in 2024 or 5 during the peak of the solar cycle, where we're going to see some grid failures and the Iron Curtain fall, because literally it will kick small sections of the planet back into the Stone Age. And luckily, we've had years to prepare, and there will be small outliers and groups all over Europe, all over Central Europe, Eastern Europe, Western Europe. There are permaculture villages all over the world. China has some of the best growing capabilities with the south-facing Korean-style greenhouses. with the bamboo coverings. So we will survive and thrive in the future. It's just that how long will it take during the transition, the unrest? We've been warning about this for years. It is going to be a very rough ride from now. It doesn't get any better, in other words. It slowly gets more and more dystopian and weirder.
But more and more self-sufficient on the same way.
Yeah.
And, you know, I had a strange thought because you were talking about the kingdom of Mu there. And if we do trace back through several epochs of history, you know, perhaps what you're talking about, those pockets of people that will be left in 2,000 years or 4,000 years or 8,000 years of reading a history book, that will be the new civilization that rose out, that had the tech, that repopulated the new world, that began the new tech, the new systems, the new farming techniques, whatever it was, of the new mathematics, engineering, etc., of those pockets of what we have now, surviving through this and passing that knowledge down. But you got to wonder how many times this has happened prior. You know, what about the last interglacial? I keep going back to that one too.
Yeah.
So, you know, it does seem like it's almost a repeat. And do we get to this cycle? Because you got two ways to look at it. Either elite have protected all what you're talking about, this infrastructure and the digital blockchain and all these things underground and hardened it. So it is the new system when it reemerges after all the chaos is finished here about 2030, 2035. And then they pop out as, you know, seemingly magicians or something because they have all the tech that was left over from underground. Or we go the other direction. It truly is lost, except for the pockets. And the population regrows after that, and it just re-arises, and then we repeat the cycle, and then we get back to this point again, and then the sun does its thing, and then we get knocked out again. And we've just been in this continuous cycle for how many millennia or millions of years?
Yeah, I
mean, you can go as
see,
deep as you want on the conversation like that.
yeah, well, I can see like sustainable communities like Oppenheimer Ranch Project and our neighbors gilding together and creating a pocket of a new civilization, which
Yeah.
we have a new name for. And it starts at these central seeds, and everyone joins, and it builds out from there. And that's the only way it's going to happen if we want to be resilient and abundant during the shift. Because the moment the grid goes down, there's going to be a lot of crying, whiny bitches, I hate to say it, that are not prepared, and that they're looking for someone to hug them or something. But the fact is that you got to step up to the plate and listen to someone with some leadership skills and get to work, because this is a whole new world we're going to be building if, in fact, this empire fails in our lifetime.
Oh, within the decade. You know, the lifetime's quite some time away there. Yeah, the resiliency, because if your community was up and running, and then it touched with another one in Arkansas that was up and running, and then there was one in Missouri, and eventually would tap back into mine over here, and you know that would be the new catalyst, perhaps for a new trade route from Colorado through Tennessee to North Carolina.
Yeah,
who knows?
yeah, right.
You know, that kind of resiliency is what really, if you look back through history, it was those communities that had access to food and water and energy and warmth, and you know, could have been a cave near a river with abundant fish somewhere, but it always has those same certain elements to it. And I think that's why yourself and myself have chosen where we sit, because those elements are right where we are, and cradles of civilization have arisen from these same elements again and again and again. You need those same things. And then eventually there's an overproduction, and then the term called money starts, and people trade. And yeah, it's just a repeat. I think we're heading back. I don't know what the cycle linked with this one is. I think it's 400 years or 2,000 years. Maybe you could speak to that better than I.
What was the question?
Well, I mean, what do you think the cycle duration is on this one? I mean, coming in right now, obviously governments know we're on a super incredibly heavy, powerful cycle, and they're trying to mask it and deflect from it. But is it a 400-year cycle or 2,000?
I wish I had pulled up the Cosmic Catastrophe Iron Cross that was created.
Oh, I know that one. Yeah. We're sitting on the cross again, aren't we?
Randall Carlson. Yeah, we are. And this is my entire scientific research as a geologist. I'm a stratigrapher and a paleontologist. And the work I did was go out in the field all over the country and look at sedimentary rocks. We did some studies in Iowa. We did studies all over the Northeast, from New York State to West Virginia, Pennsylvania, etc. But what we were looking at was the nature of these cycles, because we were working under the premise that a mechanism, and the cycle itself was called the punctuated aggradational cycle. It consists of two parts, a high stand and a low stand, that were separated right in the middle. And it is only now, decades later, that we know what that is. And that's the Iron Cross cycle. So the cycle
explain to the novice here, the high stand and the low stand, define
I'm
those
about
two,
to get
I guess, parameters for me.
Get to that. So every single stratigraphic cycle that we see in well-preserved basins have two parts. They last one precessional cycle, 26,000 years. And one of the facies shows a very deep environment, like deep in the ocean, and another one shows a shallow environment, like the beach, at the exact same spot that we're looking at the rock. So that means the environments have to shift hundreds of miles, or the ocean has to rise and fall hundreds of feet. And this has been happening forever, for hundreds of millions of years in every basin on the earth. And the last cycle boundary we can go look at in Florida is the Key Largo limestone, which the unconformity is now where we're living. We're living on the unconformity after the 12,900 year event. So the Younger Dryas event happened. And then what happened, David? The sea level rose 400 feet. And whatever environment was being deposited for 12,000 years, all happy and calm, was all of a sudden 400 feet deeper. So you went from a beach to an abyssal out in the ocean. And that's what the cycle looks like. There's a sand portion, and then there's a shale and mud portion. And these cycles happen every precessional cycle, every 12,600 years, which is about a 13,000 year high stand and low stand. Now, we just got done. The biggest devastating cycle boundary was the mass extinction that just happened at 11.5. So it went from 12,900 to 11.5. And during that time frame, that's the cycle boundary. When the sea level rose 400 feet and made a new environment right over the sedimentary rocks. And now for the past 12,000 years, that deep facies right in the same spot, or that deep environment. And right now at this time, we are on what's called the sea level fall surface. So for the next 1,000 years, the ocean now drops 300 feet. And it's been doing this every time. It goes up 300, down 300, up 300, down 300. And so now we're on the sea level fall surface where the ocean will recede and the glaciers form. Now, what's the mechanism? Because during the Younger Dryas, it got really hot, and then it got cold, and then it got really hot again. So we're expecting it to do the same thing during this potential flexure point. It will get extremely hot, maybe because of a solar outburst, and that will be immediately followed by a rapid glaciation and a sea level fall.
Yeah, but you're talking about 15 degrees Celsius drop, not like a 1/10 of a degree rise like the IPCC spots. Right. We're talking about 10, 15 degrees Celsius on either direction.
Places on Earth, the temperature drops 23 degrees C.
Cheers.
All right. So
you wake up tomorrow and your average temperature is 23.
Here's the caveat that it takes a long period of time, 500 to
7 degrees Celsius or Fahrenheit.
Yeah, 500 to 1,400 years for this to occur. And what is the mechanism? Is it a solar outburst that burns the earth, scorched earth, everything gets heated up, and then clouds form and it gets dark, and then it's snowball earth, it gets freezing cold, and it snows for a decade? I mean, this is what we have to look forward to. If this event happens in our lifetime, wow, you better get out your notebooks and start taking notes and burying those pages.
You know what's happening because you're watching Diamond. It's super hot. Just describe the heat. Yeah. And see, that's the thing that I don't like. Is the IPCC here is squawking about a 1/10 of a degree, a 1/4 of a degree rise. But, in just not even 12,000 years ago, it went up 10 degrees Celsius. And how fast was that rise? Just 100 years, it went up 10 degrees Celsius off the bounce off the bottom of the Younger Dryas. Like straight up.
14 degrees in 150 years. 14 degrees C. That's like 25 Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
Average temperature. And if the average temperature on Earth were to drop 3 degrees today, it would be snowing all over the place. In places where people wouldn't ever expect it, it would snow all the way to the Everglades for the next month or two if it was that low. A 3-degree temperature shift, average global temperature, is massive. And when we're talking about 0.03 up and down, everyone's like, oh, we're burning up. It's almost embarrassing. It's impossible as a climatologist to even notice the change on the Earth's surface. Weather changes every day, place to place. There's always record highs and lows, always, even in global warming and global cooling. And so it's the deception from the mainstream media and the way they write a headline that if you read the article there is no information in the article about the headline. It's the exact opposite information. They are allowed to get away with this shit. And now there are, well, let's say 60% of the population is so dumbed down, so filled with misinformation that they're completely useless on Earth for anything moving forward. They're just like bumbling idiots, in my opinion.
Humor me for a second on a million-year time span. Like if you're looking at the younger dryas in a 10 or let's say 14-degree movement of temperature, like where does that register off 1,000,000 degrees? Is that just like a little tiny bump that barely registers? Or, really, if you're looking at a much, much longer time span, let's say 5 million years.
Yeah.
Where does that really register on there as in terms of hugeness on a 5 million year time period, 1 million year? It probably would just be like a little dip, maybe even barely even discernible on that line.
No, not at all. In fact, if you just take a look at the EPIC data, look at all the ice core data and the proxy data that has been laid on that and has been rehashed now for 3 decades. I mean, it's pretty high resolution. The Younger Dryas event is the same exact event that happened 104,000 years ago. This is a 100,000 year cycle. And then if you go back to 230,000 years ago, it's the same event. So this is if you were to talk about
You're getting a square wave pattern then instead of a sine wave.
If you were to talk about it in Mouton-Milankovitch terms, which is what my master's was devoted to, Milankovitch in the 40s, he calculated the orbital perturbations of our planet and our solar system. And the Earth has a wobble, and that's the precession of the equinoxes every 26,000 years. That's not the main cycle. If you look at the EPIC data, the Iceland core data, or the Greenland data, what you're going to find is a 105,000 year cycle. That's the big one. And I think that is the crustal slip cycle. And that the last one just happened, and we're good for 85,000 years, thankfully. But it's not like rosy news, because after the first cycle, after the 104,000 year cycle, David, you have the first precessional cycle. Then after that, it's an ice age for the next 4 cycles. The next 4 precessional cycles is a deep ice age. And the same thing happened in the last 100,000 year cycle. We were in multiple ice ages for 80,000 years after the last interstadial. So there was an interstadial 104,000 years, it lasted for about 20,000 years, and then it got cold. And it stayed cold until the Younger Dryas event that warmed us up again. And now we've been warm for 12,000 years. And now for the next 8,000 years, it drops way back down to the ice age. So it take 8,000 years to get to maximum glaciation. But can you imagine the global catastrophe as the sea level drops 300 feet, exposes all the clam poop and sludge? Just imagine the smell. And then ice forms on the polar regions and in all the mountain regions worldwide. Now, what you're going to get is some amazing growing environments, which is why we picked the area here at Oppenheimer Ranch Project. If there are glaciers forming in the Rocky Mountains, every spring we're going to have the most epic freshwater runoff into our valley that has ever been seen. And there is evidence that the river gets 130 feet deep here. It did during the last event, and which is why our barn is 160 feet above the river, because we want riverfront.
Yeah, you got to think though, as the sea levels dropped, during the rain periods, you'd be incrementally, being washed out with that. And I'm wondering what kind of cities would be discovered from the last interglacial that are that far underwater that would reappear again.
Yeah, these would be megalithic cities, and we would rebuild them. And we would rebuild them for 80,000 years during that sea level low period. And then,
could I ask a question?
The big event occurs. Can you imagine having built Atlantis, and that somewhere around 16,900 years ago, the sea level comes up like 40 feet, and all of the major structures are now underwater? The catastrophe is coming. And around 14,500 years ago, you sent crews out and you start making things like Göbekli Tepe warning centers, talking about the precession of the equinoxes in the language that you're using. It's not in English. It's not in any written word. So nobody knows what Göbekli Tepe means, because they are blinded by all of the gobbledygook that they've shoved in their head at university. These people don't deserve to be scientists. You and I have of an uncanny knack of going into a situation and pretending we're idiots. That's the only way you can gain knowledge, by saying that I don't know anything. So let's start from the beginning and let's see what's going on here. If you have a preconceived notion or you have some kind of a narrative you need to fill, you're never going to get to the bottom of anything. And that's what makes me so disgusted about this world.
Well, think about it, the time scale you're talking about, after the ice had onset, after the exit out of the last warm period into the glaciation cycle, say, 80,000, 90,000 years ago? Well, if it was locked in ice for that period of time, 80,000 years in ice, I think how stable the weather patterns would have gotten instead of this little 10,000 year blip in time. Now put an 80,000 year window on, the planting and harvesting dates pretty much would have stabilized after the ice sheets reached their maximum.
Right.
There are 40, 50,000 years to build your civilization on known growing patterns of food. Now, you obviously be closer to the equator and you wouldn't be as far north, but that's a lot of time for a stable civilization for grow and harvest dates, 40, 50,000 years. That's 4 or 5 times longer than us.
Right. And ding, ding, listen to this. Yeah, because we just started. The last erasure date, everything was erased, is 12,900 years ago. Everything's erased. So we've only been able to build for 11,500 years, and it only really kicked up 9,000 years ago. But back then, they had 10 times more time, which is why we have things like pyramids and Sacsayhuaman and these megalithic structures that no one has any idea how they would build. But I guarantee you, David, if you and I were able to stay on Earth for another 60,000 years, we would know how to build all that again easily, and maybe just using harmonics.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Yeah. Resonant and frequency, no, they keep taking us back to the fossil fuel end of things, where it can only be mechanical energy to either split or lift something. But it's been known through history, and even in the Himalaya right now with the monks with their horns, to get a vibration to be able to lift large one-ton blocks and move it with your finger. I mean, that's known now. And then you put in the Tesla technologies and antigravitics and things that were suppressed for so long from the 1880s forward. I mean, they brainwashed an entire planet for 100 years that it can only be done with like horsepower mass to accomplish the task of building, when we should have gone the other way. No fuels like that, vibration and frequency, and that's it. And that would have been more efficient anyway, would have solved all the problems. And we would be lifting probably 1,000-ton blocks by now if we learned how to if we could harness that power, making an object weightless by canceling its resonant frequency, by putting the same canceling frequency like a Bose headset of speakers.
Yeah.
I don't
know. I think that
maybe I'm just out there today.
No, I think that what we just did was prove the problems with capitalism. Capitalism can be utilized to generate wealth in a free market, but capitalism itself is its own demon. It literally subverts the breakthrough science that allows for things like free energy, free flow of knowledge, and on purpose to generate money. So this goes, once you said Tesla, my mind went bing. And I said, look, this is what they've been doing the whole time. Anytime some technological breakthrough happens, some oligarch grabs it, kills everyone around the person that knows about it, and holds it. And then he finds out how he can make money from it. My father told me when I was a child, and I never understood this. He said the internal combustion engine is purposely being used today, even though it was invented right now at this point, like 120 years ago, because we can make money on selling gasoline. There has been technology since 1980 that we could have gone levitation technology for highways where there would be no accidents. There would be no need for fuel, very limited expense. But the reason they didn't go that way is there is no financial gain. It would destroy the insurance market. There would be no more car insurance. There would be no more fossil fuels. This is the money. This is all the money. This is like 23% of all the money on the planet, insurance and fuel. And so it's impossible to actually have breakthroughs in science that benefit humanity because there's no money in it. And that's the sickness. Leaders, they know it. And I don't think they do. Just look at Joe Biden. He's the dumbest fucking schmuck ever to hold the office of president of the United States of America. The guy couldn't have a conversation with you or I. If we had 3 questions for him, he wouldn't even know what we were talking about, because that's where we've come to. This is an idiocracy. It has nothing to do about cutting edge. It has nothing to, the whole green movement is a lie. I exposed it at Energy Fair last year. The amount of destruction on Earth for rare earth elements, making of batteries, solar panels, wind turbines will destroy the planet in 15 years. We will be buried in toxic waste up to our necks if we switch to green, which is going to save the Earth, man. I mean, it's a fucking joke.
Sounds like you're getting a little, you're going to be above the neck to the eyeballs, man. You're getting furious. I see you. Yeah, the lithium thing too, you know, there's not even enough to get the batteries. There's already a 30% shortage on that. So, I mean, that's kind of dead in the water. Again, was it the carrot and the stick illusion of that to get people continually distracted away from other energy sources? Or at the same time, you know, thinking that there would be all these indoor vertical gardens and we never have to worry about food production, etc. A lot of things have been sold to the public that aren't exactly, well, full truths. And we could have, you know, imagine planetary exploration by this time. If we had electrogravitics and you were able to encapsulate that weightless function of opposite spinning disks, and you put electricity into those and you made your disk spin and bend and bank a little bit, depending on where you put the electricity on the magnetic field, you could torque it and make it move right or left or up or down. We should have been on other planets already, for sure. You know, with that kind of tech, and also in the oceans, we'd be able to, you know, put a front in front and literally blast through the water. But with that plasma edge, just go right through there. You're creating that space between the physical medium and your craft by putting that plasma edge out there. I mean, anything would have been possible at this point. And I really believe that we are trapped on this planet here. I mean, that tech could have taken us off world, but are we meant to get off world? And even, okay, just humor me for a second here. A lot of things are talking about NASA and saying they didn't get up there in the 60s because the Van Allen radiation belt and the amount of lead they would have had to have around their craft to get them through said radiation belt would have fried them to a crisp 16 times over and back before they even got out to the moon. But with anti-gravity craft, it wouldn't matter what it weighed. You could put multiple tons because it's weightless. So it doesn't matter what the metal is on top or how thick it is. And you could blast right through that without the radiation, say, danger that there was for a tiny, thin aluminum hull that we'd never been back to the moon again like that. Some reason, you know, because I always question that, say, wait a minute, every time, even wherever we go on the planet, we do it 10 times deeper. We do, you know, Marianas Trench, we've been there. Then there's you can take tourist trips on a sub down there now. Well, it's like that with every single thing. You went up to Mount Everest. That was the hardest mountain in the world. K2, man, people are climbing that every single year now. Everything that's ever been done in humanity has been replicated and gone to like the extreme sports, whatever. Why is it only that one trip to the moon? Still baffles me. I mean, if it was like that, it should be like the Jetsons where we're going up there for the weekend and we're cruising up to the space station and we're up at the moon, man. But none of that happened. And it's just such an outlier by itself that nobody ever could replicate that. And they're still trying to get up there, except for satellites. Yeah, great rockets, unmanned stuff, great. But what's the disconnect from the 1960s and now 50 years later of technology advances?
In the 60s and 70s, the Van Allen weren't as riddled with radiation, according to some recent papers I've read, and that we, humanity, put the radiation into the belts due to all of the electromagnetic pollution that we're pumping into our magnetosheath. So we actually radiated the Van Allen belts due to technology, which didn't start ramping up in the 70s. And by the 80s, we didn't know what we did. And by the time we were able to read it, and the 90s and billions of satellites and all the antennas and everything bleeding out this electromagnetic radiation is now known to be, it's like a laser beam. The Earth pours it into the Van Allen belts from the surface. So we've actually created a barrier to get to the moon based on our technology. That's how stupid we are. And we're not willing to admit it. The mainstream media will never read one of those papers or admit that's what we did. And right now, NASA is trying to figure out to the moon because the world has screwed up space. Do you know how difficult it is to plan a launch based on the 1.7 million pieces of debris flying back any entry space at any given time? It's almost like Russian roulette to shoot a rocket into orbit There is so much junk up there. The odds of something hitting you at 16,000 miles per hour is pretty high. And so that's where we are today. Now, travel that through 100 years. It's impossible to have satellites, impossible to go to space. We can't leave Earth. There will be trillions of objects moving at 18,000 miles an hour right up in low Earth orbit. How could you exit? So these are all problems we've created, and we're not willing to say that we're that stupid. And I just said it. So what are your thoughts on that?
Turn off the switch and start over.
Yeah. So a huge solar flare will literally wash all that debris back to Earth, bring all those metals back to the surface. We'll find native gold and copper on the surface again after the event, and it'll be brilliant because all those satellites are steel, copper, gold, platinum, and that'll all just melt on impact and be a vein. Isn't that what happened last time?
The black satellite's still up there, man.
Yes.
Wasn't that one? Yeah. So, I mean, you know, with the solar activity really starting to be noticeable to the global populace and noticeable changes electromagnetically now, like you can almost feel it in the air and the soup, and people are just starting to tune into this, not centeredness any longer because of this same electromagnetic frequency soup and pollution. So I do think it's starting to finally affect people. That it's reached that saturation point where humanity itself is now being saturated. So if you were going to start up at the different layers, like I said, F4 layer, and you were working your way down, and each layer continuously was more saturated. And then, you know, I found it so strange. And this is during the Tonga and after the Tonga eruption, NASA had come out and said, because there's so much ash up to 180,000 feet in that center plume column there, the discharge is going to create so much more electromagnetic static electricity that you're going to start to see a lot more sprites and electric elves and all kind of different unexplainable things. But don't worry about it because it's just static discharge up in the upper atmosphere. So don't worry about it. Back to sleep. But you can see how it sort of trickled its way down here, and what we're going in the top, 1 or 2 miles of, whether it be towers on top of mountains or what's being beamed in and out by satellite or what's on the top of skyscrapers, you know, that top mile or so of complete saturation around the base of the planet on the crust as well. So it's kind of working its way down. I wonder if we reach that saturation point now where it's complete electromagnetic pollution at every single layer in the atmosphere as well as the ground level.
Yeah, well, the threshold to space has dropped about 23 miles in the last 5 decades.
Yeah, it would be compressing down.
So
Pluto's atmosphere collapsed as well. So, you know, you start to look at these planets. Pluto's atmosphere collapsed. Is it Neptune's? Yeah, Uranus's atmosphere reversed itself. The dark spot split apart and reversed. And you're just getting a lot of anomalies. X-rays flying off. And what's that? Saturn as well. And Jupiter with the 10X aurora. And then let's see, veins of minerals were glowing with an aurora on Mars just 8 months ago, and now somehow our atmosphere is not going to be affected. We're from the outer planets inward, so if there's a change on the sun affecting the outer planets noticeably with atmosphere, you could almost predict that something would happen on our atmosphere too, based on all the other planets that have atmospheric anomalies on them at this point.
Yeah, and here's bad news. I'm about to do a podcast over at Magnetic Reversal News on the fact that a new paper coming out shows that in the last 60,000 years, there have been 70 eruptions.
Oh, I saw that one. I read that one. Yeah.
Far larger than Tambora. And if you go look at the graphs, which I'm going to show on the podcast, every single 1,000 years, all the way back, we're going to go through 69,000 years. The last 80,000 years is so epically different than the last 10,000 years. It's almost an embarrassment to be alive on Earth now. And what I mean by that is there were VEI 7s all the time. All the time. We haven't had one ever in since the Younger Dryas or earlier. You know, the last one we could probably look at is going back all the way. Where would that be? That would be back to the pinch point 70,000 years ago. That was a VEI 7. And they said the population was reduced to maybe just 10,000 people or less or a little more. It's argumentative. But if you look at the data, that type of eruption doesn't happen every 70,000 years. That happens every 10,000 years, every 8,000 years. So we are at a 10 VEI 7 lull for eruptions right now. That is bad news for you and I. And that's
What was
new news.
Tambora rated at? It was a VEI what? Tambora.
7.
Year
7.
without a summer, yeah.
VI7. And so, but what the data shows is that's a low 7, is that these types of eruptions bigger than Tambora happen every few hundred years. And we haven't had one for 70,000 years. So that's bad news for you and I. That means that a big one is coming. And
that was the Toba eruption then, wasn't it? So Tambora and Toba, right? And in the same region, yeah?
Yeah, and Toba was VEI 8 minus VI7 8. So it was a big one. But those types of eruptions like Toba occur every 1,000 years, not every 70,000 years. That's the problem. And
really? Okay.
Yeah. And if you look at this data set, it's mind blowing. So we all talk about Toba. Toba has been booming every 1,000 years.
Yo, dancing with the Toba.
Yeah. And it's quite obvious because like the Toba eruption isn't the last mass extinction. This isn't the embarrassment of science. And we're just going to wrap it up here. If you talk to actual peer-reviewed scientists that have graduate degrees and you ask them when the last mass extinction was, almost 50% will not say the Younger Dryas event.
Reason?
Because they're uneducated, they're uninformed. Everything's compartmentalized. Whatever he wrote his PhD in, whatever orangutan ass hair growth or whatever it is completely useless and insignificant.
Does that come with a razor?
The big picture people don't exist. When I got into academia in the early 90s, they broke apart the multidisciplinary approach. Physics, chemistry, and geology were on the floor of a university. But in the 90s, they broke that apart. Physics went up to the 8th floor, chemistry was on the 3rd floor, and geology was on the 2nd floor. So no one could talk to anybody and no one could get any answers. I had to ask permission to go up to the 3rd floor, go through a security check, to go then find a scientist to ask a question. And that was complete nonsense. This is on purpose. Multidisciplinary science is science. Compartmentalized science that we're doing now is a fraud. It's been perpetrated by the national. That's when the National Science Foundation was turned over to the World Economic Forum. It's a fraud. The National Science Foundation, the UN, the WEF, the world government, the globalists, it's all a whitewash for rich elites controlling the narrative. Nothing to do with science. Nothing to do with academia. Look at the fucking crybabies that are coming out of these liberal fucking universities, just like the one I went to. They can all suck it. They can't hold a job. They can't work. They don't know how to grow food. And they don't know a fucking thing about history, wars, humanity, climate, nothing. They're brainwashed to say that they're the problem. They polluted the earth. They're causing climate change. It's stupidity. It's almost insanity. We live in a retarded, insane fucktardia. Those are my final words. David?
Oh, so you think they have a chance? You think we have a chance? Great. Now, speaking of splitting up different disciplines, because I do believe that astronomy and astrology were both connected about 200 years ago, and they were ripped apart, and one was demonized, but that's the energetic flow through different parts of space that were categorized as whatever you would go from Chinese astrology to Indian Vedic astrology, or over here into the West, what we know as the 12 signs of the zodiac, to explain the energetic areas in space where the planet and the solar system were transiting through. But then you use astronomy to line it up to know where you were, depending on the arc and that sort of thing, where the planets would spin in their orbits. They used to be the same science, because you start to think about it. Well, yeah, well, okay, well, I know we're going toward that planet or that star. Now, what's the energetic between that in space there? Will it make the sun go hotter, cooler? Will we vibrate faster? Is there more dense debris up there? Is the planet going to get smacked? What's up? So, you know, that's all been mapped out for such a long time, and then they split those apart.
Yeah, well, and they bastardized it and demonized it. Astrology.
Yeah. Well, the whole energetics of space has been that whole thing of the woo-woo now. And now you can only look at where the orbits are and where the stars sit and how they transit around each other. That's all you're allowed to study. You're not allowed to study the energetic patterns of that region of space, which makes no sense to me whatsoever.
It doesn't mean anything, David. You're a witch.
I have Newt cat of tail.
Well, that's why I have Micah Dank on the show, because I believe his astrotheological insight is so important to this great shift. It allows people that are questioning like the narrative, if they believe it, wait a minute, is really everything wrong? And then you start to get into that and you start to question your religion or your purpose. I believe that that is the future of humanity. Now we're going a little long here. So let's finish it up with this fun exercise. If the world were going to end, let's say we had a date. Let's say, the empire is going to end, the grid's going to go down, and it won't be up for 3 to 5 years. And that's going to happen in 2 years from now. Exactly on this date, March 28th, 2024. The grid's going to go down and never come back up. What are the 5 things you would be prepping?
A
That's a
forge. Oh, no, I'm thinking about going back into a forge. So anything that I would be able to mend metals or bend metals, and then also the understanding that algae floats on the water and it has oil in it. And I would have areas and maps. And another thing, to be able to find what I would need to put in the forge. If I didn't have coal, I could use algae, squeeze that into the briquettes, because algae biodiesel comes from that. And if you have certain types of algae, and if you extract the oil out of it, it burns like in a motor. It's hot enough to give you that type of heat. And I would also have aqueducts and different irrigation canals and systems to bring water to places to make it easier to grow crops. But as you see around the world, there's vast aqueduct systems. So I would install one of those or get the knowledge and have that, but intertwine it with the algae production to be able to get that heat source to run the forge off of that. And at the same time, build out a full I wouldn't say aquaponics, but an aqua system that included the fish, the turtles, the frogs, and have that whole protein source. And that would just be step one of getting things ready for the forge.
Yeah.
And then you take it into medicines. And how are you going to produce your medicines? Well, you probably have to have 100 different types of flowers growing, and medicinal flowers in different ways. And the whole knowledge of how to use those and prepare them. These are the types of things that you would really need for society to move forward. You'd have to understand how to replicate modern medicines, going back to the base plant constituent, and how to remove that one constituent out of probably 30 in a plant.
Yeah.
Would that require some pressure, some heat? Who knows? Maybe I have to make my own alcohol. Well, then I need to start distilling to be able to get some sort of solvent to get that, whatever it is, out of the plant. So then I need to know distilling so I can create alcohols. But alcohols are part of the medicine too. But then they're also a solvent that can extract things. So, you start to get into this loop of really what is the most important. Well, I would for sure say medicine and forging, being able to do that. Then you could create tools. Then you could create saws and hammers if you needed to, if you knew how to forge. So you can start making all the tools again to rebuild society if you could melt metal. Because, look how much scrap junk's laying around. You could find a million billion things of aluminum to remelt, or steel itself, if it's not carbon steel, of course. But you got to start somewhere again, right?
Yeah.
So, and the food production, obviously, and the water purification, you can't do without sanitation, water purification. Got to have the food, the metals, so you can rebuild, ways to create alcohol and that sort of thing. And then, security of sorts, because once you start to get your region big enough again, others are going to want to pop back in on that. But then that's a trading opportunity versus a collision opportunity there, or some sort. It'd be more on the trading end. You could set up new systems outside what we talk about, the money system. And, how do you get a civilization back up and running? Why? This is pretty much how it was redone after the Younger Dryas. They started with certain base things. Construction too, whether it be mud bricks or whether you have the tools like a saw, which you could forge to then go cut a tree and then cut a board and then start over again. Or do you have the basics of mixing cement? Well, there again, it comes down with pressure and being able to crush something. I don't know. You're going to need water to have cement. So you need to have that whole loop kind of system set up.
Well, back in the day, the first people with metal were the pharaohs. And it's not going to be like that this time. There's going to be so much scrap metal lying around. Any idiot with a hammer will be able to make a knife. So on my top 5 to survive and thrive.
Yeah, maybe I said more than 5, but I was trying to interloop all those 5 and just like different levels of it.
Yeah, I would say that the first thing you need is water. You don't need aqueducts, you need water. So if you live by a river and it's clean water, it needs to be close to the source. It can't be polluted. Almost no rivers, lakes, or streams are like that anywhere in the world. 99% of all rivers, lakes, and streams are polluted. So everyone's living by a polluted water source. So almost everyone's screwed. We're not. We're 11 miles from the continental divide and our water is pristine. We can drink it directly out of the river. So you
Does it
need
come up from
clean
a
water.
spring? And if you like ours is spring fed here, so
Yeah,
it's coming out.
spring
Yeah.
water. So you need a spring or you need a deep well with good water and a hand pump. So water is number one. And my number two would be a wood gasifier. This is a way to create electric and all types of other mechanical and physical energy moving forward. Wood gasifiers are expensive. They can be homemade, but they will be able to power your entire house or infrastructure if the grid goes down. If you have some electrical wires and you have electrical things that need to be run, you can simply burn wood to power a generator. These things all need to be in a Faraday cage, number three, which you should have, where you put all these things that you might want to use. Now that only leaves me two more. And the two most important things after those things, in my opinion, after you have water, a gasifier, and a Faraday cage to hold your electronics, is the knowledge to harvest medicine in the wild, not grow your own. That's not going to be an option. If people aren't already growing their own hundreds of herbs and know how to make it, it's just not going to happen. So the easiest thing is to get a book on wild edibles that the Native Americans or Far Eastern medicine or any ancient culture that used plant medicines, get that book. And even if you didn't read the whole thing, you can refer to it and hopefully find the right plant. Now, odds are you might find the wrong plant and die, because we all know about that guy, Mr. McCandless, that went up to Alaska and found the wrong herb and killed himself, right? Inadvertently. So you need knowledge. That's the final thing. You need skills and knowledge. And that allows you to grow your own food. If you've already been listening to us, you have seed stockpiled, you have dry goods. That's what every prepper has. I got 3 years worth of rice and beans, but I don't want to eat that. I want to eat the microgreens. I want to eat the wild edibles. I want to eat the wild strawberries, the wild raspberries. I want to eat the wild fruits, the wild animals, the wild fish. So I want to be able to locate all the food I need without having to produce it. Systems like I just blacked out there. Hydroponic systems and all that are great now when we have grid and energy and supplies, but that's all going to just be gobbledygook and trash while you're trying to get a minnow out of the river because you're starving to death, in my opinion. So there's ways to be abundant, and it has nothing to do with you overworking systems and growing food in hydroponic systems. You could just learn how to walk out into the woods where you live and harvest fiddle ferns in the spring, and then the next flush, and then the berry flush, and then the dandelions, and move on from that. And that would be enough food to have anyone survive with high nutrient density and high mineral content that will actually allow you to live and teach others how to live off the land. Because we're going to have such a huge population reduction that there won't be much pressure on the lands. Now, granted, if you're in a big city and people with bullets, like you said, security is number one. I don't think security is going to be an issue. The population is so stupid, they're going to starve to death quickly. No one's going to be out with a few people are going to have guns, starving to death and get shot by people like me that have unlimited weaponry, long distances, and knowledge to keep sick people away from us. So I don't think they're going to be an issue. The issue is after the downfall. It's very quick. 60 to 80% population reduction in 3 months. And then the rebuilding. So knowledge is key. Security, I like that too. That would be my 6. But most people, I think, already have dry goods, Mylars, something, at least a year's worth of stuff, a couple months worth of crap, even if it's like Patriot Supply stuff. It's garbage. It's not good for you, but it tastes good and you don't starve. And then you can go look for the dandelion greens. You know what I'm saying?
I will repair your biomass gasifier with my forge. And what would we trade for that? 1 ounce of silver, man? All right, why don't we split that ounce of silver straight in half?
I like it.
That's a fair trade, man. Oh, by the way, cattail season is coming right now, at least here in Southeast US. If you find a pond and you got a clean water source, cattails are a great form of vegetable.
And people have no idea.
Are way late in the season after all the start's gone down there, but
they grow from zone 3 in Alaska all the way down to the equator. The entire plant can be eaten. The seed head, the stalk, and the most nutritious part is the tuber. So you don't even need the cattails to be in. You could find the old stalk and go down and get that tuber, and you could be eating that rhizome. So a wonderful survival plant. I'm glad you mentioned it.
Yeah, provided your water's clean.
Yeah.
You don't want 3 miles. You don't want Love Canal pond over there. I got some love. I got the freshest cattails ever. They're all from the Love Canal.
Okay, awesome. It's been awesome talking to you, David. And let's get your.
Well, that was a joke. I thought somebody would laugh, man. Ha ha.
We're not live. Let's share one more screen of yours. And let's share. I know it's here. There you are. Okay. Can you see it? There it is. The Adapt 2030 page. This is what made Mr. Dubyne famous. It was also that in his oilseedcrop.org website, but a lot of people don't go to that, you said recently. So check out.
Keeping it anymore.
Yeah. So go check out Adapt 2030 on YouTube. He's at 160,000 subs. You're almost famous. Did you get one of those plaques?
Yeah, no, I didn't apply for it yet. I probably should.
Yeah, that way.
But my last video's been cranking a little bit better, about 40,000 views average on those last few. And the Mini Ice Age Conversations podcast as well. You know, when people want to hear about this information, what Diamond and I were talking about, this very valuable information that people are seeking out right now because, well, if you never learned about prepping and you don't know what's happening, and the president just came out and said, hey, there's going to be food shortages, and you thought everything was good because the government told you it was good, and you suddenly just got blindsided. Well, 350 million Americans, I don't know how many of them were at the prepped out stage. I bet a minimum 150 million of them are absolutely terrified, shaking in the boots because they don't even know how to spell prepping because they don't even know what it means. And they're looking for information like this that is going to help them get through because they really don't even know where to start yet. And those are kind of things that I do talk about on my podcast. And, you know, that though the Biden thing, he just shouldn't have spoken those words to panic everybody unless that's the plan, to create the artificial shortages by getting people to run to the stores because the supply chains won't catch up. Now, if that's the plan, then that's a brilliant move. But if it was some stability thing to keep the narrative moving along for another couple months, oops, foot in mouth. We never know, will we?
Yeah, and I think that's the plan. But guys, if you don't know, right here is the search bar on the top of the website when you go to someone's page, like David Dubyne's or Diamond's page. If we have probably collectively, you and I, David, maybe 4, 5, 6,000 videos on prepping topics we've talked about over the last 6 years. If you go up to that little, it looks like a magnifying glass. That's the search bar. Click on that and put in a word, prepping, put in the word wood gasifier, put in the word cosmic rays, whatever you want to find a video on our channels, you can go search it there. It's impossible to go through 4,000 videos and look at the titles or the description. That would never happen. So I put the keywords in the titles. I'm sure you have, but we have a huge, I mean, I've done so many prepping podcasts in the last 5 years. It's mind-blowing. There is so much information on how to make Faraday cages, how to grow food, how to do this, how to do the other, that it would literally take you a lifetime to watch it all, or 5 years, whatever you want to talk about. And the same goes for Adapt 2030. Go find out how to search our YouTube pages to get that information. And those are my final words. David?
I'll say that at the description box of every video that I do, I put every link in there about the stories that I was doing and creating. So again, you'll come up with like heaps of links that you can click out to, even just within the video in the description box. Because I want everybody to try to, question the information I put out. I don't want to be blindly believed. You and I both wouldn't be sitting here if we just blindly believed what we heard. I want you to go do your own research. So I leave all the, the links there so you can go off and do your own research, learn about it, talk to others about it. And then, try to disprove what I'm saying. And with all the links there and all the information that's been forthcoming, you can't. That's why the links are there and the information's there, that it's backed up. So when you go look for it, and then you're like, well, that is true. And I don't know how many people have written me and said, I didn't really think you were onto it. I didn't know if you were full of BS or whatever, but, I started to follow the links, and then those brought me over to this grand solar minimum. And sure enough, man, I saw the same cycle that you saw. So it's all about, following the information trail. I'm leaving the breadcrumbs there for you to follow yourself, along with all the prepping stuff.
It's the Great Awakening, and we've been fighting tooth and nail against the censorship. We're on multiple platforms. Go look us up, David Dubyne, Adapt 2030, Mini Ice Age Conversations. He's on every freaking podcast available on the entire planet, Apple Pod, this tunes, that tunes, Lisbon, everything. It'll all be linked below. And you can literally not do a thing at work for 8 hours for the oligarchs and just listen to Mini Ice Age Conversations all day and get paid. And that's my Final opinion. Dave, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Let's do this again soon. And that was a boom.
Thank you, Diamond.